I have 20,000 plus life and still die in high nightmare dungeons, even with 10,000 armor, which is technically the armor cap, which is kind of wrong for high nightmare dungeons. The way how resistances, armor, and damage reduction works has quite been changed with Season 2. What's the armor cap now? Do resistances really need to be at 70? And what does a good item look like? And we'll go here through every item type: helmet, chest, gloves, and so on. There's 3 components to survival at this point. That is your resistances, your armor, here 8,500, which says reduces physical damage taken from enemies of equal level by 75%. And here the important part is actually equal level. And then last but not least, there's also damage reduction that comes into place, which happens after the armor calculation. Now the damage reduction cap is 85% for armor. You can't go higher. The interesting part though is the further you're away from the 85% cap, damage rises exponentially. So you truly want to make sure to be as close to the cap as possible. That being said, 10,000 armor, or like 9.2k, you're roughly at the 85%. Now the problem is that this 85% is for enemies of equal level. But if you're going into a tier 100 dungeon, we're talking about monsters being level 154. And well, they don't straight away kill me. My damage reduction is good here, right? We're surviving this. Normal mobs, they don't kill us. Good. But it doesn't look like 85%, right? I'm losing a bit more there. But we're also not like a bit higher than the cap actually indicates. Now let's go slightly below the cap, right? We set 85%, but even that would be against same level attackers. So now we're hovering around 75%. So like this is 1,500 armor lower. Doesn't sound like a lot. And now suddenly the damage is vastly higher already. We find some enemies that don't poison. We're kind of instantly dead, right? Now this is 12,322 armor. So another 2,000 on top. 3,000 armor over the cap. Taking the poison damage, but in total, taking vastly less damage than again before, right? They're barely getting me down. I mean, the poison hurts, but also less than it would if this was max. What to take away from this though? The maximum armor cap for tier 100 dungeons, so for like tier 90 and above, for the highest content, is around 13.5 thousand. Does that mean you always have to reach that to be tanky? Hell no. You do want to be as close as possible. But for example, with my build I'm running here right now, this is 8,512. But I'm also having the 20% damage reduction here, 20% damage reduction there, another 15% damage reduction, and then 20% damage reduction as I have Barrier active. That all helps to keep me alive as I'm also continuously having Barrier with Bone Storm. That being said, the goal is now to maximize armor as much as we can. So you do see that I actually have a skull in here, because one advantage about the Necro is that with a Book of the Dead, I can get plus 20 to all resistances. That's amazing, since it allows me then to actually min-max armor over gems. Now 250 bonus doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually not 250. Let's remove that socket here. Still 70 resistance capped. That was just for a different build with cold resistance. And I'm putting this in now and we're getting 250, but we're actually getting more, because we have the total armor percentage plus. This is a 24% total armor. If I now add the pens with another 27% total armor, that also multiplies up on what you actually put in here. Now let's remove this from the amulet as well. My resistances are still maxed out and I can put on another skull. Don't just blindly put these diamonds in as you're actually able to max this out nicely, because again, a diamond is only 5% resistance to all elements. So I'd rather target the resistance you're looking for, and that's where we're also talking about good stats. Right now, I have 2 helmets I use, the left and the right one. Has maximum life, total armor percentage, damage picking up blood orbs, and all stats. That's nice. And this is also kind of like 3 stats I'm always looking for in a helmet. I want a total armor percentage because it can go up to 28.5%, actually 29.2 is the highest you can get. Then you can get a huge maximum life. That is fantastic. And for most of my builds, I'm looking for cooldown reduction or a stat. That's dexterity, all stats, willpower for overpower, something in that direction. But then the fourth stat, in this case, with everything that's new, can be a resistance stat. So if you're struggling with fire, poison, lightning, whatsoever, getting that on a helmet is not, this helmet is bad. It's, that's fitting quite well into my equipment at this point. And you can see how we just hired our armor over gems by another 700 roughly with 250 gems. And now if we're putting on the armor with a higher total percentage, right? Well, hello there, 9.6. So we got in total 1,100 armor higher here. And that, in the grand scheme of things, as the damage is multiplying the faster you go away from the armor cap, is amazingly useful. Therefore, don't only look for armor and total armor percentage on your helmet. Also try to take the armor nodes in your Paragon board. For example, here I always take the triple stack, but I also in the first glyph socket put a plus magic percentage kind of glyph, because that doubles the value of the armor and it also doubles the value of the damage, especially in the beginning here. But then down the line, whenever there's a good opportunity to take bonus armor, like here with the bone graft board, I keep my points open to just pop a little bit more. This is only 100 armor more, but again, we're looking for our character. We're at 636. I'm getting 100 more, but it's actually more than 100 more because you're having the armor multipliers going. Now I play T-Bolt's Will for essence production, but technically I could get rid of it and just go a little bit more with essence production on right clicking. And here comes then the pans in, which is another 27% bonus armor. T-Bolt's Will gives me minus 950. Doesn't do anything for my defense, but 20% damage reduction. Now, obviously there can be damage reduction on your pans as well, which I don't have. I'm currently having total armor and maximum life, but it brings us from 8,500, another 3,200 armor plus, almost to the armor cap. Now you can ask yourself, what's better, 20% damage reduction more, or getting even closer to that armor cap? Because the damage reduction we're getting from these pans in comparison is exponentially higher than when that tiny 20% can give me, especially if I take these pens now and would re-roll a armor reduction stat on it. Which brings me to, what do pens look like stat-wise? Total armor and maximum life, we talked about it, that is a must. But what other stat do you want? And here my favorite for Necro is damage reduction in total, but the damage reduction in total is usually low. I tend to take damage reduction from close enemies. Most of my builds are close, and this stat rolls relatively high, higher than the total damage reduction, because it's like a conditional damage reduction. This is a general thing. All the conditional damage reduction, while fortified, distant enemies, and so on, they roll generally higher because they only apply in X cases. But generally, as you're having a build, Barbarian, Druid, whatever, being very close, or you're playing Infinimist and you're in your opponent, then damage reduction from close enemies mostly feels better. And there's also another damage reduction stat that's super cool for Necro, and that's damage reduction from affected by shadow damage over time, which works for so many builds because they do shadow damage over time. It's one of my favorite stats on the Necro in general. Now for the fourth stat, I usually look for ranks into one of the skills I need, Corpse Explosion or Blood Mist. Or you go here for a resistance stat if you need it. Now the problematic thing in getting your armor up is obviously all the amazing uniques. Because you see I'm playing Soulbron. In this case, Soulbron though gives me max life, which is good. Barrier generation, so I get more barrier. And then 20 and 20% damage reduction. That's a lot. That's 40% damage reduction in total. That's quite huge. One of it is conditional, but since I have constantly barrier, that's nice. Now you have to consider though is that the damage exponentially rises in the higher dungeons. And the further away you from the armor cap, the more damage you take. So having 20,000 barrier is nice and having the damage reduction going on. But if that barrier, as your life, is also made out of paper, that's unfortunate. Then your barrier is kind of useless because it kind of helps just to stopgap at the point when you're still vulnerable to these big smasher damages. So you got to create a baseline mix between these two. That's also why playing shields in case of the Necromancer with the Lidless Wall is nice, because there's also 20% chance to block, and there's a 60% blocked damage reduction. That ain't crazy bad, to be honest. But for my build, I really want T-Bolt's Will, which brings me to one aspect that can change it all, and that is still disobedience. You gain 1% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 60%. This could be a total of 66. Now 60% on 10,000 armor would bring you up to 16,000, a little bit too much, but you also don't always have the maximum of 60% running, right? You get to start doing some damage to soak it up. So having like a 9,500 armor baseline and then putting disobedience on your helmet, chest, hands, or shield in this case would allow you to boost even further. Again, as you can see, it's kind of like Soulbrand, T-Bald's Will, and Litless Wall. So 3 components of this build. Where would disobedience now land? I could sacrifice the barrier I have on the helmet, but that would be 20,000 potential barrier just for a wee bit more armor. So we'd be again back to the question, is it Soulbrand for 40% damage reduction, or is it then disobedience for the bit more armor? If you do have the space though, it's a fantastic aspect to get you right at that cap and make you indestructible. Now, as an option doing higher nightmare dungeons, you could also take armor potions always with you. Getting another 500 is crazy good, because the 500 again is not 500. It gets times your 28%, so you're adding even more on top. I sadly can't craft the 900 armor potion because I don't have it. But like this, we could be going up to 10,400 suddenly. And I still have all my barrier and everything going on, making me survive way harder. But the only thing I have left to change is the amulet, because there's 4 items that can have total armor percentage. That is the chest, that is your helmet, your pants, and your amulet. Considering that the amulet is, for example, in this build, such a key component for amazing damage, I now have to think, is 40% damage reduction with conditional barrier better than having another 3,000 armor? Because if I take a chest now with total armor on it, I'm suddenly at 12,047. Fantastic. I mean, this is a low roll though, so there's another 9% missing, but we're also not getting that much more. We're looking at diminishing returns here, right? This is only 1,500 more. Whereas if I put my first multiplier of 28% off, we're losing almost 4,000 armor. You notice how vast the first multiplier really makes the big difference, right? And the second one you add to it is diminishing returns. So at this point, we're actually very nicely maxed out, but also that you want to have the total armor rolls as high as possible. And with a 20.3, I'm only getting 1,600 more. But this one here is a 27% armor roll. So we're talking about 2,200 almost more. Yeah. In this case, squeeze out every little percentage. This is the most important stat you want to have. Now we get pens and helmet already covered. Let's look at the other defensive items. And I also provide this one as like a blank, what gear stats would you look at, in the description below. For the amulet, yes, there's also total armor percentage, which is just amazing. The same goes for damage reduction. And here for Necro again, damage reduction from affected by shadow damage over time, damage reduction to closer distance, and damage reduction all are happening. Try to take the first one mostly, but else I'll try to go for damage reduction from close. Now, obviously, as every good amulet, you usually want to take ranks in whatever helps you amplify damage. Really good for most Necros because you usually do use a curse. And then last but not least, I like to take a damage plus because it's just so good for everything, or a cooldown reduction. Depending on the build, essence cost reduction can also be very fantastic. And one thing we haven't even talked about resistances is that your rings have also specific resistances, and you're not looking for that. What you're usually looking for is, does it have maximum life? Does it have overpower damage in my case? Does it have physical damage and maximum life? Cool. But your rings also have varying stats. This one has cold resistance, this one has fire resistance, and this one also has fire resistance, where the amulet is also always resistance to all elements. So when you're looking at your rings, do not only look at, the actual stats. Yes, you have to look at the resistance because you can't reroll that. I mean, for me right now, fire resistance is at an all-time high. You currently have 150% fire resistance from bonuses and minus 50 from penalties. But we only have 120 in lightning, 120 in cold, 120 in poison, and 120 in shadow. And here, don't underestimate your Paragon board. There's a note I'm not taking. That would, for example, give me some maximum life and shadow resistance. Don't overlook these nodes, as this might be something you're just lacking at the point. The resistance nodes are not completely useless. I usually try to take the all elemental resistance nodes. Like you can just clap here, then damage check and overtime reduction, and then another 6% to all elements. Very useful, to be honest. And then fill it up with the special stat of your rings. And we're now looking for a chest. Yes, total armor is possible there, and maximum life as well. As every good item, you can also get the damage reduction going, and here we could go even more for close enemies again. And then the final stat you're looking for, something like all stats, barrier generation, physical damage, shadow damage, damage for picking up blood orbs, maximum minion life. All those just waiting for you. Let the defensive items usually be, well, defensive items and boost your stats. I mean, going for all stats is good because it gives you a little bit of strength, and strength end of the day increases armor, and that armor, again, 319 in my case, is being multiplied with a total armor multiplier once more. Now for boots, there isn't much you can do in the damage reduction department. I mean, you can go for dodge chance, you can go for specific resistances, and you can boost your stats again, trying to go for strength. But that's where I do actually like Flicker Step and why I play Flicker Step, because it gives me damage reduction from close enemies, and that up to 20%, while also reducing my ultimate skill cooldown and giving me ultimate skill damage, movement speed, and even all stats. I mean, 24 all stats is, again, every strength point is an armor, 24 bonus armor. It's just too good. I've been loving this, and I'm not going to be putting it off. Just useful. Now for me, for most of my builds, I try to hover around 9.5, 10,000 armor. That's quite decent and holds out for tier 100 nightmare dungeons, especially with the barrier production that I'm going for and the damage reduction I'm generally running. And I hope this will help you to improve your own playstyle to make you a bit more durable and kind of figure out which items are good or bad. You're looking for builds now. How about the ultimate Blood Surge Blaster, also able to kill Uber Lilith, or Tempest Storm just flying through a dungeon?